So I'm very grateful to Raymond for his explanation of what synod means, as I've sat in them for nearly 40 years wondering what the hell. We were doing randomly at the very first Diocesan Synod I attended, where it got to question time, and Colonel MacLeod Matthews, who had been a colonel in the Indian Army, struggled to his feet on his cane with a big silver knob at the top of it. And the Bishop of Oxford was away, and the Archdeacon of Oxford was actually chairing the synod. MacLeod Matthews stood up and said, "Does anybody in this room have the slightest clue what the dickens we're supposed to be doing?" To which the Archdeacon of Oxford said, "What kind of a question is that?" MacLeod Matthews said, "Well, I think it's a very simple question." So the Archdeacon said, "A very simple answer." He said, "We haven't got a clue." and that's not the point. I am aware that I keep going to things now where people are reminding me, this is the last time I'll be doing this, and this will be my last synod. You probably go, yes. But part of me wants to start by thanking those of you. Some of you in the room have been around on the synod for a while, some of you less so, and it's good to have some guests here today. But I do want to thank you, the elected members of synod, and those staff members who have served and continue to serve the synod. As Raymond has indicated, I think we have made improvements in the way that we kind of run the synod, and they run in line with some governance improvements, which interestingly enough, when we met with other dioceses earlier in the year to kind of share good practice, one of the things I think I can say that other dioceses were interested in were the governance changes that we have made in our diocese, which we think is making a difference in terms of our overall governance and indeed the proper demands of charity law. So I found it challenging to think about what I might talk to you about today. What I was very clear was I didn't want this to be the bishop's address, which is equivalent to bringing along my holiday snaps and talking to you about the life and times of the Bishop of Bristol. What I thought I would do would stretch my neck above the furrows of the deep culture of our churches and just think about some of the huge challenges there are in our nation and in our world at this current time. And what I want to say is that for me this is entirely kind of theologically driven by my belief in the coming kingdom and the vision that the whole of creation will one day be redeemed and the connectedness of God's creation will be manifest. And of course, I am equally clear that just naming issues is not enough. It is in part whether or not, as a church, we are going to engage with these issues. It was so easy, and I can see it at my age, is that at my age we're kind of, I'm not saying we're right, but we certainly have a clarity on kind of what we don't like about our world. And the great danger is that, people like me just sit around dinner tables, doing the grumpy old man stuff. I certainly don't want to do that. What I wanted to do was just flag some issues where I think as a church we've got something to say. And I think our engagement with the wider world will be turbocharged if we can start to say some of these things coherently in the face of the difficulties and the challenges in our world. Having been around the Westminster Village for the last 8 years, it has struck me how much of modern politics seems to be happier dealing with symptoms rather than addressing the underlying causes that create those symptoms. Nobody's saying that treating symptoms is unimportant, but I think we are agreed that mostly prevention is better than cure. So here they are, some issues of opportunity, I believe, for churches. And the challenge for us in a church which is constantly being told in the media that we're a failing institution. The danger is that we start to become entirely inward-looking and incestuous. And I think I could say that we have tried in this synod to get a balance between the church's business, the governance, and the kind of wider world in which the church finds itself. And it won't surprise you to say that my first issue is that of division. It's not difficult to look at society and conclude that we are increasingly polarised and divided as a nation, and to some extent that division extends into the world in which we find ourselves. We could, in recent times, flag Brexit. I met with my friends from my pre-Christian days recently, all of whom voted to leave. Only one of them didn't. He has seriously fallen out with them, won't even talk to them anymore, because he thought leaving was so wrong. And of course, that kind of rhetoric around leaving or remaining has been a very divisive thing. In some ways, it would have been better if, when we had the referendum, if it was 80-20% in either direction, rather than 52-48. I don't want to go on about this, but I certainly could do. The election of a president in the USA that has been construed as domestically divisive and increasingly globally divisive, and just this last week we heard of his refusal to sign the Paris Accord on climate change. And then, of course, there is the rise of the Corbynistas and their election success, apparently driven by hordes of young voters. And even if we disagreed with their politics, the fact that Jeremy Corbyn could engage younger voters needs to be noted by the church, and indeed the diocese, that seeks to increase its engagement with young people. I don't want to comment on the election particularly. I think a hung parliament is either a recipe for a disaster or might offer a responsible opportunity for those who might seek to unify the population around the United Kingdom. See, I think as a church, we have something very powerful to say about divisiveness and about the interdependence and unity of the whole creation. I think that's deep in our theological resources. But of course, there is then the very challenging question is, how much do we as a church model that unity and interdependence? You could ask questions about the way many of us think about our parish share pledges. You could think about the more divisive issues and sometimes the distinctly immature way we seem to go around discussing these things. This week in the Episcopal Church of Scotland, the Synod have voted to change their canon law to redefine the definition of marriage to include same-sex relationships. This will inevitably, I think, create a context whereby the Church in the United Kingdom will have yet another public opportunity, either to publicly display its division, and, even worse, sometimes you just feel there's some naked hatred behind some of these campaigns. I worry about this divisiveness, both in the wider world and the Church. Our next General Synod will have to tackle the challenge as to whether there is a way forward that can keep the Church of England together, or whether we, for the sake of our various campaigns, are happy to be party to some kind of major realignment within the Church. What do we have to say in a fragmented world? Secondly, the environmental challenge. I've already mentioned my disappointment that President Trump has refused to sign the significant and very hard fought for Paris Agreement. I am aware that some of you are sceptical of the scientific claims of those who warn us about climate change, but there is no denying that extreme weather events are proliferating with their accompanying loss of life and dreadful destruction. You will be aware that some of the large populations on our planet happen to live on the most low-lying areas in the world. A very small change in sea levels, a very conservative estimation of those sea level increases, will create mass migration that will make today's migration anxieties seem like a drop in the ocean, if that's not an unfortunate simile. There is a theory that governments will be far more likely to take climate change seriously from the point of view of threats to national security than by statistics blaming cows for releasing large amounts of methane into the atmosphere. Some of you have watched recently the Netflix documentary Cowspiracy, basically saying that the most serious contributing factor to greenhouse gases is meat eating. Has to be said, I'm pretty sure that the movie was made by a vegan. However, the argument takes an hour to outline, and the stats in the documentary are plain wrong. But the general direction of the argument is correct. Even the most conservative estimates of eating meat and the increasing number of mouths that eat meat in our society, by the way, I eat meat. The general direction of the argument is correct. More greenhouse gases are put into our environment by meat eating across the world than all the cars and aeroplanes pumping of carbon dioxide, monoxide into the, and what's the other one, nitrous oxide together. As a faith, we have a very firm theological basis, don't we, for leading the charge on the stewardship of God's creation. This needs to become more mainline in our thinking. We are not called to do nothing until God redeems the whole of creation. We have a part, and an important part, to play. But two things I would add to this. Firstly, we need reliable science with a coherent message. I think part of the frustration I feel, maybe you feel it too, is it was only 3 years ago we were all being told to go and buy diesel cars because this was good for the environment. Now we've got a pile of diesel cars which are relatively squat about 5 years from now. Though I am now told that the newest diesel cars are in fact the cleanest, and in fact the oldest diesel cars are cleaner than the nearly new diesel cars. It's really straightforward, isn't it? Secondly, and this is moving into high-risk area, but I do think we need to find a way of speaking about exponential population growth, which is clearly a factor to the threat to our environment. The bigger the population, the bigger demands made on the environment in which that population lives. Of course, it's very easy to see the problem, but it's very difficult to find a way of speaking about a cure for such growth without sounding dreadfully right-wing or draconian. However, one of the factors which I think we really should stand for is that one of the things that makes a major difference to population growth is the proper education of women. And as we know, there are cultures around in our society that are abjectly against educating women. Why anybody would want to think that, I cannot think. Can I just say, in making this point, I'm not saying, therefore, the fault is women's. I am saying it is usually men who oppress women and do not educate them, and this would be an amazing start. I've spent quite a lot of time in Africa, as many of you know, and I would say very clearly, the future of Africa needs to be in the hands of women. It really does. Cultures and indeed faiths that inhibit the idea of educating women need to be challenged. Thirdly, the global marketplace and its accompanying problems. To put the problem at its most simple, we have a global marketplace, but we have national jurisdictions. While this situation exists, the system is just totally vulnerable. This past week, there's a lot of backslapping and applause around the 70 countries who signed an accord to ensure that they will act together in terms of financial service regulation and, as far as possible, marry together tax regimes that do not have advantage to one or another of those jurisdictions. Of course, the obvious thing to say is that means there are 126 countries that have not signed up to this commitment. Without an agency that can enforce international jurisdiction, there will always be places on planet Earth, surely, that will seek economic advantage to suit their own national interests. We can even see that within the current economic union, European Union. This is likely to be an impossible ideal, but I don't think it's an ideal that we should lose sight of. So what are the problems of global markets? Well, the first and most obvious thing is it doesn't make the global market wrong, but the way we have vast inequality, economic inequality. This country, households in the bottom 10% of the population have on average a disposable or net income of £9,644. The top 10% have net incomes almost 9 times that, at nearly £84,000. Wealth in Great Britain is even more unequally divided than income. The richest 10% of households hold 45% of all wealth. The poorest 50%, by contrast, own just 8.7%. This is simply not acceptable. And it's not good enough. And we have a responsibility to ensure that the common good is served by a commitment to create a fairer society. I think we would say there have been some inroads into discriminatory behaviour, but there is still a long way to go. One of the things that should seriously disturb us in this room is the way that austerity, I think, impacted disabled people in a deeply unfair way. There have been some inroads into this, but there is still a way to go. The second problem is volatility. This is partly caused by our increased reliance upon technology. I mean, just recently, not directly connected to global markets, but we've seen computer systems hacked in the National Health Service, in the Pentagon, and although British Airways wasn't a software problem, it does seem a bit weird that the world's biggest airline can be brought down for a whole weekend by somebody switching on and off the power switch. And of course, there is the whole issue now that billions of pounds of capital can be moved around this globe in milliseconds. Surely there is a vulnerability in that. Not that we would necessarily worry about people who are moving capital for good reasons, but what about all the people who are moving it around for bad and self-centered reasons? This is a big issue, and it's very difficult to know what one can do about it. And my point around all this is that it seems to me that what this market stuff and allowing the market to kind of continue in parts of the world unchecked is it just creates anxiety. I mean, naturally, of course, I mean lots of people who are pensioners. Quite a lot of them are very anxious about the pension funds that they rely on for their income. Tillich, the man credited with a coherent systematic theology, Paul Tillich said that human beings, since the fall, have suffered from a deep and ineradicable sense of anxiety. You see, don't we, as Christians, have something to say about anxiety? Picked up a quote of Rick Warren recently, said, the more you pray, the less you'll panic. The more you worship, the less you will worry. You will feel more patient and less pressurized. There have been some psychological experiments carried out on the impact of people who spend time praying. The outcomes generally are very good in terms of people's stress and anxiety levels dropping. The challenge is that too often in a church which might be constantly being told that it's failing, is that anxiety haunts the corridors of churches. What did Peter mean when he wrote, "Cast all your care on him, Jesus, for he cares about you"? Fourthly, sexualization. There's broad agreement, I think, in our culture that pornography, sexting, even fashion, can lead to our children being over-aware of their sexual selves long before puberty and shamelessly exploited by marketing, which does two things. One, it consumerizes our kids, and secondly, it sexualizes them. Our children are dependent on us. We have a responsibility not to exploit that dependence. Jesus told us that adults have to become like little children to enter the kingdom, to become increasingly dependent on God, to keep silent while our children are exploited by being consumerized and sexualized, addicted to things and to a sexualized version of themselves from a young age. I would say is a blasphemy by omission. We have much to teach about our identity as children made in the image of God. Finally, thankfully, there is in our culture, it seems to me, what Immanuel Kant would have called any sense of teleology. It's nothing to do with televisions. What it means is there is no end story, no narrative about the ending of life and what is beyond. It is failure to die, it is taboo, and its impact in the West seems totally bewildering. I wanted to end from where I began 14 years ago, when at my inauguration, I asked the question the psalmist asked in Psalm 137 and verse 4. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? I think it's a song that still needs to be sung. I think it's a song that needs to be heard. I think we have to make the effort, for the sake of the world that God loves, to try and sing that song together. The choice is very stark for us. We can either sit in our synods and our churches arguing amongst ourselves, or we can make a decision to get serious about engaging with the world and the big issues. There are more. It's just that I don't have time for that. There is much to enjoy about our world, but there is much which should truly concern us and concern our faith partners in the other faiths. I think you might call this address, if you wanted to call it anything, the Bishop's unfinished agenda. And friends, I believe, for the sake of the future of this great diocese, which I have loved serving, that agenda needs to be considered, needs to be thought about, and needs to be acted on. And as they say, good luck with that. Thank you for listening.